Hello everybody, my name is Kara, and today I'm here to talk about my least favorite and most disappointing books of 2019. I'm also going to do what I did last year, and I'm going to put timestamps for all of the books I talk about, so if you want to hear me trash books, but one of them is your favorite and you don't want to hear me trash that one, you can skip it. I won't judge you. I understand that. And I'm also going to link all of the wrap-ups where I talk about these books, so you can get more in-depth thoughts rather than me just like complaining about things. So that's why I'm linking the wrap-ups. And last thing before we actually get into the books, I'm going to structure this the same way I did last year as well. So the first part is going to be books that weren't my least favorite, but they were just really disappointing. For whatever reason, they just didn't live up to what I thought they were going to be. And then the second section is going to be ones that I just really didn't like my expectations or the hype might still have played a role in my feelings on that book, but I don't think I would have enjoyed the book a lot more if I just hadn't been hyped up for it, you know? And then the last section is going to be my worst of the worst, which is just going to be the books that I actively hated that I read, which is not to say that everyone has to hate these books, but I just want to be clear that I am distinguishing those from the ones that were like just disappointing or like I really didn't like. So here we go. Starting off with probably the most controversial book on this list, Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I buddy graded this with my friend Katie, and we were both kind of disappointed in it. I actually have a full spoiler-free review and spoiler discussion, which I will link down below, but I just really had so many problems with this, and I think part of the problem, like the reason this is in the first category, is I thought this was going to be really amazing. Like I didn't like the Grisha trilogy by Leigh Bardugo, but everybody said that Six of Crows is just so much better, and it was better than the Grisha books. But I don't think it was by that much. Like her writing is better, which was nice, but like the setting and the magic and the characters especially, which were all things I have consistently heard Leigh Bardugo praised for, I really didn't think were that well done, especially the characters. I just feel like Leigh Bardugo did this thing where she creates a tragic backstory for a character and that's it. Like she never gives them any personality or any like wishes or purpose outside of having this traumatic thing happen to them, or many things happen to them, and it's like you can't build a character like that, you know? I also found the whole heist element super boring and frustrating, and some of it was like really predictable, which it's not supposed to be if it's a heist, and I also just really hated the end of that book. I had been slightly interested in reading the sequel to this one. I already owned it and everything, but after that ending it just felt so manipulative and out of nowhere and stupid that I will not be picking up Crooked Kingdom. Also, by the way, I'm probably gonna get pretty angry in this video, so just keep that in mind. I might be using more language than I usually do. Next on my list, I have Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. And y'all, this was just a really bad year for sci-fi for me. Like, I have several science fiction books on this list. Actually, most of the science fiction I read ended up on this list, which is pretty disappointing. I know a lot of people love these books, and I can really see why people do. It's really nice to have sci-fi that is more hopeful and warm and character focused. Unfortunately, this one just really didn't work for me. This is another case where the characters just had no personality, like no development. Like the one thing I will say is I think Becky Chambers had a real handle on the world and the different alien species, which was really cool. But I don't think she communicated that knowledge to the reader effectively. There's also a few like really important romances in this book that I think were just super underdeveloped, especially because a couple of them you're thrown into, like they've already been happening, and then you start the book and you're just kind of in the middle of this relationship, and it's like, well, I don't care. Like I'm not like invested in these characters loving each other and risking their life to be together, because there hasn't been any actual character work built up to that. And just as a sign of how completely detached from this book I felt, there was a subplot involving an AI and like if she's considered a person and things like that, which is something that I absolutely love. Like that is one of my favorite things to read about in science fiction, and I did not care at all. Like I did not care what happened to her or to any of these characters. I just remember coming away thinking like, wow, Becky Chambers really wants to bang an alien. Like she really wants to. Like that's it. That's like really the strongest message I came away from this book with. Next book is another science fiction novel that I heard universally good things about, and that is Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Neuvel. And I think my main problem with this book is not just that I had heard really good things about it, so I was kind of set up to be disappointed, but the way that this book makes you think it's going to be profound and then it's not, at least in my opinion. Like the whole novel is like really structured because it's in like this interview format, and you get people talking constantly about like the ethical implications of what they're doing. This book is just set up like it's going to be this really thoughtful exploration of knowledge and technology and like sacrifice and responsibility and how far people are willing to go to learn something or to get answers about the world we live in. And that could have been brilliant, and it just wasn't, because every time it looked like we were going to engage with that idea, the characters would just completely ignore it. They kept making choices that made no sense based on what they had just said or done. I also really didn't care about the mystery aspect of this book. Like, it felt incredibly predictable to me, especially the twist ending that I thought was going to be like super impressive. And I saw that coming from really early on, and just like the whole mystery, like trying to figure out who the interviewer is, I just didn't care, because if you don't make me care about the people the story is happening to, and if you don't engage with your story in the way that you sort of promise you're going to, like, I'm just gonna check out, even if there is this like mystery that you're dangling in front of me. And now we're moving into the second section of my books. By the way, I don't think I mentioned this at the beginning, but these are not in any particular order, except, again, depending on their category. Like, within the category, they're not sorted by like worst of the worst or anything. I'm just talking about them in whatever order I wrote them down in. So the first one in the second category is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. This one I'm like really upset about still, because I think the issues I had with it are things that are actually harmful. One of the big things I hated about this book is the way that at the very, very end, mental health and mental illness is used as a plot twist. And considering how thoughtful the rest of the book had been about mental illness, I thought that was especially upsetting. Like, I really, really hated the way that was used for like cheap shock factor, essentially. And I also hated the main character in ways that I don't think you were supposed to, because at the beginning she is supposed to be a very unlikable character. Like, she's very rude, she can even be kind of unfeeling or cruel to people, and throughout the book you kind of gradually see her start to get a little bit better about stuff like that. But there are some really important things that she never actually changes her mind about, and that was kind of a deal breaker for me. Actually, I think in the wrap-up where I talk about this book, I actually read a quotation from the novel, because the permeating like attitude about ordinary or like normal people was just really sickening to me. Like, the whole book, and especially the main character, was just written in a way that, like, if you are not deeply damaged by trauma, then for one thing, you have nothing to complain about. Like, nobody can have any problems if you're not this one main character. And also, number two, you must be stupid, or like less intelligent, less valuable, less worthy as a human being, because you don't have these really traumatic, horrific events in your past. Like, the only way to be meaningful as a person is to suffer. And I just really don't like that implication. And I also hate the whole attitude that like ordinary people who have a more like quote unquote normal life, that they don't mean as much. I hate that idea that just because you don't have all of these big experiences, that doesn't mean that you are worthless. And I hate the way this book said that that was true. And that happened consistently throughout the book. That is not something that got better by the end, and I just really wouldn't recommend this book. This is one that I saw people describe as being so hopeful. For me, at least, that really, really didn't happen. I'm also going to give a brief mention to Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. Again, just meaningless characterization. This is another book that like seems to pride itself on being super unlikable, like on having characters that are very unlikable, which I'm fine with, but you still have to develop them. Like, it's not enough to just make the reader hate them and then to tell the story with people that they hate. I also really didn't like how a huge plot point of this book is that one of the characters was an actor and therefore an untrustworthy liar. That's something that I probably take more personally than other readers would, because I am in performance, but that's just a stereotype that actors and theater people have been dealing with for hundreds of years, and it's really, really irritating to me that we are still doing that in the 21st century. I think that's pretty ridiculous. Another thing I thought was weird about this book is like there were just these random segments that were like borderline, not body horror exactly, but like if medical stuff bothers you, don't read this book. It was pretty disgusting, and it was completely unnecessary too. Like, there was no reason for those scenes to happen except to try to make this book feel, I guess, more like serious. So I really didn't like that. And the next book I'm going to talk about is kind of an unusual one in that the only reason this book is on this list is because of something that happened after I read it. because otherwise this would just be a book that I didn't like, but it's not like I expected a lot from it and it like personally disappointed me like some of these other ones, or that I think it's like actively harmful in certain ways like some of the other ones I talk about. The reason this book is on this list is because it won book awards. Like, I read this and I'm like, this was not good at all. And when I read it, not a lot of other people had, so I didn't really know the general feeling on this book. And it turns out this won like a shit ton of awards. And that is The Grace Year by Kim Liggett. I think it's Kim Liggett. This is just one of the weirdest and sloppiest attempts at social commentary I think I've read recently. I do think that every once in a while there were some really profound and well-said things about feminism and about the way that girls are forced to interact with the world because of things like rape culture and misogyny, and I think those were very thoughtful. And that's why I didn't give this book a lower rating than I did, but there were a lot more things that I really didn't like about it. I hated the romance angle. Like, this is one of my least favorite love interests, I think, ever, because it's basically, like, trying not to give too much away, but it's basically like a character who does horrible things and kills people, and then he ends up with the main character and you're supposed to feel like we had that justified. And I'm like, well, maybe we know a reason that he did what he did, but he still did these horrible things, and how can you just be okay with this? I just really didn't understand that. There was this whole chunk of the book near the middle that was just the romance, and it was excruciating to read because I hated this guy. This was another book that felt very predictable, and I think that one of the problems for me is that if a book is not a mystery, like it's another genre, but you build a huge chunk of the reader's enjoyment off of not knowing what's going on, I personally feel like that's a mistake. Because if you're like me and you're pretty good about figuring out plot twists, if you don't like the other elements of the story, it's going to feel extra frustrating that you know exactly what's going to happen. And that's what happened with this one. I even mentioned in my wrap-up, like, if you guys are at all familiar with the Salem witch trials in the United States, I guarantee you, you will probably know at least one or two of the giant twists that happen in this book. This is another one where, like, the main character was not developed at all. I feel like she was just a vehicle for the story to happen. And I think that can sometimes be an effective way of telling a story if you have like a really, really good concept in plot and writing and setting. And this one did not. It was also set at this really like vague, like I can't tell what time period we're supposed to be in because some of it felt really old and some of it felt more modern. So I just felt like this book was a mess. And when I saw that it was winning these like very prestigious prizes, I was kind of shocked. So that's why it's on this list. Next, I have another science fiction novel that I hated, and that is The Sparrow by Mary Doria Russell. This is another one that I see get so many high reviews. Like, this book is considered life-changing by a lot of people, and I'm not trying to say it shouldn't be, but for me at least, I really hated it. And I'm gonna kind of do what I did when I reviewed this book and kind of do like the personal issues I had with it, and then the more like objective story complaints that I had. So for one thing, I really, really hated the obsession this book had with celibacy and with other people's sex lives. Like, that just got really grating. And to have a book that was, this is kind of like some of the other science fiction I've talked about, to have a book that was supposedly this really profound meditation on like belief and doubt and like people's purpose in the world or in the universe, and to have it basically reduced to like people just being hyper invested in other people's sex lives, it was just kind of ridiculous to me. And I really hated that that was like the main issue the author chose to focus about. And then also on a personal note, I had a lot of issues with the way the author portrayed Catholicism and the characters in the book who were Catholic. This is one of those cases where, like, yes, I'm sure some people believe things this way, but to make it sound like this is universal is something that I don't like. And I kind of hate to imagine people reading this book and thinking that they can take that at face value, because to me, as somebody who is Catholic, she got a lot of stuff wrong, or she emphasized a lot of stuff that didn't really make sense, I think. And again, like, that's in like the personal issue category. So I don't think that's going to bother everybody who reads this book, which I totally understand. But then my more objective story complaints, like storytelling wise, I hated this book. Like, the whole thing is set up so that you know from the beginning that all of the main characters except one die. Like, you know that from like the first couple pages. And then the book goes back in time and tries to get you invested in the ultimate fate of those characters. And I'm like, I'm not gonna do it. Like, I'm not gonna do this to myself when you've already told me they die in horrible ways. Like, this book was pretty long, and it felt even longer because, again, you're forcing yourself through all of these flashbacks for characters that you already know are doomed, and even if you try and forget that, the characters themselves were not very well developed. Like, there was maybe one or two that I actually liked or really cared about. And then in addition, the main character, Emilio, you do get to know him better than some of the others because, again, he is the main character in a 500-page book. And that was one of the only things I thought was done really well, is that some of his struggles with what he believes and what he does and that kind of thing were very profound and very well done. And I wish the whole book had been like that, instead of, again, getting caught up in like the celibacy issue and in all of these flashback scenes. And some of the other characters were just like really irritating. Like, there's this one character named Anne and her husband, and they were so annoying, and like all of the dialogue in this book, but especially their conversations, felt so unbelievably stilted and just really unrealistic. And especially the times where they were trying to be funny and like something was supposed to be clever, it just felt really, really forced. This is just a book that I don't think is well told as a story. I don't understand what the message of this book was supposed to be. So if you're reading it for something philosophical, I don't think you're gonna get it. Definitely don't read this book if you're looking to have a good time, because it is, again, incredibly depressing with so many trigger warnings for scenes that just felt completely gratuitous. Like, I don't think they needed to be there, and there were a lot of them. Next, I'm gonna give a quick mention to The Girl in the Tower by Katherine Arden. I'm not gonna spend too much time on this one, because honestly, this series just makes me tired. I buddy read this with my friend Huck from Badger Reads, and both of us didn't really like the first book, but we thought we wanted to give the series another try because it seemed like something we would really enjoy. And it was still bad. Vasya is still just an insufferable main character. She has no personality, but she has all of these like cheap substitutes for personality. Like in book one, it's like that she's not like other girls and she's just like wild and free, and she's not beautiful, but somehow all the men just can't stop staring at her. And then in book two, it's like she wants to travel and be free, which is fine. Like, I understand why she doesn't want to be trapped into, I think her two choices were basically like marriage or a convent, and I understand why she didn't want either of those. But she had nothing to replace that as like something she wanted to do, or like a personality or any semblance of characterization. The author just gave no reasons for why she wanted the things she did. Like, I have no idea why she wanted to travel so much. Like, is it that she wanted to be free from her town? Was she excited about going a particular place? I don't know, because the author didn't tell us. We were just supposed to trust that this made Vasya an interesting character. And then we also have the disgusting evil priest guy from the first book. I thought we got rid of him, and apparently we didn't. So that was irritating. I mean, he wasn't in the book as much as book one, which was an improvement, but I think he didn't need to be in it at all. Like, nothing happened in this book too. Like, it just felt like so unnecessary, and anyway, I'm not going to talk about this one anymore because, again, it just makes me sad and tired. Next, we're getting into my absolute least favorite books of the year. The first one I'm going to talk about is A Bollywood Affair by Sonali Dev. This is actually the one I talked about in the collab video where I got to complain about my least favorite book that I read that year, so I will also link that. Marinez is the one who put that on from My Name is Marinez. It's on her channel. And A Bollywood Affair, I just had so many problems with this book, but most of them can be summed up by the character of Samir, who is the main love interest. He is incredibly misogynistic. He hates all women unless he is related to you or currently trying to get in your pants. Like, those are the only two options for who he considers a worthwhile human being. This book also has the trope of like reformed by a woman's love, which I absolutely hate, and especially when it's in this context, because it's not like he starts spending time with Millie, the main female character. It's not like he starts spending time with her and then gradually starts realizing that he's been treating women badly. It's like he spends time with her and he's like, oh, well, you're the only one who's worth my time. Like, he continues treating all the rest of the women he knows like shit. And I absolutely hate it. Another thing I hate about this book is that food is sexualized. Like, specifically Millie eating food is sexualized. Like, Samir almost has an orgasm every time she eats anything, and it's just like you just wanted to scream at him to like let this poor girl eat her lunch in peace without you getting an erection and like needing to take a cold shower or whatever. Like, I freaking hated that, and it happened literally every time Millie ate anything in front of him. Also, this book had a huge not like other girls problem, because not only was food sexualized, but one of the things that made Millie special compared to all other women is that she ate, because the rest of us don't eat, I guess. Also, there was this one side character who was one of Millie's friends who I thought was kind of interesting, but the book makes it very clear that you're supposed to hate her because her voice is too high and she talks a lot, and I guess Samir doesn't like it when women talk. Also, Nala just showed up to bring some positivity, some much needed positivity to this video. So if you see a tail, that's why. And then another thing I really hated about this book, and one of the things that I think made it actively harmful, is that Samir is described as white passing, which in itself would not be a problem. Like, the book actually a couple of times makes you think that it's going to really engage with colorism and with how that is handled and how Samir is treated, and versus like how his brother is treated or other characters are. And it doesn't. Like, the book just keeps harping on how attractive and white looking Samir is, until by the time you get to the end of the book, you kind of are left with the feeling that the only reason he was written to be white passing is to make him more palatable or more attractive to readers. And that is incredibly messed up on so many levels, and I just hated everything about this book. Next, I have Cartwheeling and Thunderstorms by Katherine Rundell. This one I'm really sad about because Katherine Rundell wrote one of my favorite middle grades of all time, which is The Wolf Wilder, and I still highly recommend that book, but this one I really didn't like. Speaking of Not Like Other Girls, this is a middle grade that has Not Like Other Girls, and specifically our main character, whose name I can't even remember. The only people that she considers worthwhile are men and boys, and in fact, she at one point gets sent to an all-girls school, and this is like separate, like I think she does experience like some bullying and stuff like that, so I'm not talking about that. But the thing that she hates is that she's surrounded by women and girls who are like, by definition, not as smart and like worthwhile and interesting as guys are. And I hate that. I especially hate that this is a middle grade novel that is communicating that idea, because like I hate the idea that kids are going to be reading this and thinking like that is okay, like that is an okay way to treat women or girls. Also, this book takes place partly in Africa, and those parts were really uncomfortable because there were a lot of places where it felt like this book was getting into like noble savage territory. Next, I have The Bird King by G. Willow Wilson. This was one of my most anticipated books of the year, so clearly that did not go well. This is essentially a journey book made up of several journeys that are all excruciatingly long and unnecessary. But as I said in my wrap up, I think even if you like travel books, like travel fantasy especially, I'm not sure you would like this one, because the way it was done was also just really sloppy. Like, so many of these journeys felt very unnecessary. It was like something would happen in the next few pages where it's like, well, why did we spend 80 pages trekking through this desert if now we get to a new location and it's like, oh, we have to go back the other way? And I'm like, are you serious? The characterization of the two leads was done really badly. Fatima in particular, I think, is one of those characters who is completely formed by her circumstances, and I understand that that's like, it makes sense that that's a very big part of her character, because she had some very upsetting and terrible things happen to her. And Hassan too, like, it makes sense why his personality is partially formed by what he has experienced. I mean, I think that's true of everybody, and especially when you have like very significant events happening to you. But they were absolutely nothing beyond those experiences, and it kind of left you feeling like Fatima was just like walking trauma. Like, that was it. Like, there really was nothing else to her personality. And then the way that Fatima and Hassan depended on each other, like, they have this like really intense friendship, which again could have been a really great thing to explore, except that you never got the feeling they actually knew each other or cared about each other at all. Like, it just felt like they had imprinted on each other because they had been through so much together, which is a thing that happens. Like, that's a real thing. And if the author had actually addressed that and used that, I think I would have enjoyed the book a lot more. But she didn't. Like, the whole book was written in a way like we were supposed to think they had this really like soul deep friendship, and they just didn't. Like, I had no idea why they liked each other, why they wanted to spend time together, much less why they were so closely bonded. I also saw a lot of reviews saying that the ending is really confusing, and I see why that could be confusing. I personally didn't feel like it was. Like, I understood the ending, I just didn't like it. I just thought it was really kind of lazy in a lot of ways, and like there was this thing that I thought we were building towards that I was really excited for, and then we got to the end and like the author just like completely dropped that. Next, I have another very beloved book here on BookTube, and that is A Study in Charlotte by Brittany Cavallero. Rocky, if you are watching this, I encourage you to skip this part because I really hated this book. This is another one I buddy read with Katie, and I don't think she hated it as much as I did, but neither of us had a great time with it. And first off, like, this is even before we get into the things I really didn't like, but there were just some really weird story choices that I think personally made no sense. The author also made the choice to randomly summarize a ton of Sherlock Holmes stories and spoil them for no reason. She just kind of like shoved them into the book when they were talking about other things, and it's like, you didn't have to use it that way, and you didn't have to spoil the ending, but for whatever reason she decided to do that. And then another big thing that I think made no sense is I still don't understand why this modern retelling is even a thing. Like, how is this possible? Like, why would you have 3 or 4 generations of like Sherlocks and Watsons that are basically carbon copies of each other? Like, I don't understand. Is there like a Sherlock Holmes DNA segment or something that just gets passed down? Like, I understand family tendencies, and I also understand like wanting to live up to somebody's reputation, but that's never really told to us. Like, we're kind of just left wondering, like, why are all of them the same? Like, even the Moriartys is like, everybody in that family is apparently the exact same as in the original story, and that just is ridiculous to me, and it really took me out of the believability of this book. Now, getting into the things I just actively hated about this novel, the relationship between Jamie and Charlotte is so toxic and just baffling. Like, I understand from people I've heard talk about the later books in the series, apparently we actually get this view Jamie has of Charlotte as being like basically putting her on a pedestal, and she's like this perfect person and everything. Apparently we get that challenged later on, which is great, but none of that happened here, and I don't think you can hold off all of that development for later in the series. Like, I don't think you can do that as an author. Like, I just truly don't understand why either of these people care about each other. Like, Charlotte treats everybody that she comes into contact with like shit because she is so much smarter and better than everyone else, which is pretty true to the Sherlock Holmes character. But supposedly Jamie is an exception to this, but he doesn't feel like he is. Like, there are no scenes where I actually felt like Charlotte cared about him at all. And then Jamie's just like obsessed with her in a really creepy way. Like, he has this kind of like hero worship / crush on her, and I still don't understand why. Like, he has this idea, like this constructed idea of who she is, but we never move past that. Even if we get that in later books, which supposedly we do, we never move past it in this book. So why on earth should I be invested in these two characters' relationships if you're not going to give me anything about why they like each other, like a real reason they like each other? At one point Charlotte puts on makeup and she starts speaking with a California accent. That's important too. And that's how she dresses up, as her like dumb bimbo whore, basically, who's gonna get information out of boys. And it works. So like, the book is sort of reinforcing that stereotype that like, if you're pretty, you can't be smart. And also, if that's like the only thing that people care about, or at least that boys care about, which is just like, I don't know, I feel like that's kind of offensive to everybody. I also thought the mystery was pretty ridiculous. Like, the end of this book is like so overdramatic. Like, it feels like a soap opera. I also hate Jamie's father like so much. Apparently he's like a fan favorite character, and I can only assume we get character development for him later, because I fucking hated him in this book. Like, oh my god, I'm getting angry just like remembering his character, because he like cheated on his wife and kind of like left their family, and then he did all of these stupid things knowing that his son was put in danger from a murderer, but he did it anyway because he thought it would be like a fun adventure for him. And I'm like, we're supposed to like this guy? Another thing that I really hated about this book, and the reason that I put it in the 1-star level category, because those are like, I saved those for books that are actively harmful in some way. And the way this book glorified substance abuse and eating disorders is something that really, really bothers me. Like, the way that Charlotte is characterized, the fact that she never eats, and the fact that she used drugs in the past, or possibly still uses drugs, are treated as part of her cool girl persona and personality, and I hate that. I hate that in a modern YA novel, and I know this wasn't published this year, it was like a couple years ago, but I hate that in a modern YA novel we are still glorifying this kind of dangerous self-destructive behavior. I just don't think that any of these serious topics were handled well. There's also a sexual assault like subplot, or like that's something else that has happened to Charlotte that was not really addressed in this book, and from what I've heard it gets even more problematic in later books. And I also want to mention, like, the eating disorder thing, that's not something I think is going to bother everyone, because compared to some of the other parts in this book, it's not that prevalent. But for me, as somebody who has some experience with that, it was sickening that this book made that sound like a good thing. Like, at one point Jamie notices that Charlotte took, I think it was like 20 minutes to eat an almond, and the way that that is written is like it's a signal that Charlotte is so different from other people and from other girls. Like, she's so special. Like, she doesn't have to do all of these normal things that normal people do. And I find this incredibly irresponsible. And this is kind of one of the things that makes me not ever want to read a Brittany Cavallero book again. She seems like a lovely person, and I can only imagine that she gets better as she like publishes other books and stuff. This is just a very personal thing that I feel very strongly about. And I just hate picturing, especially young girls reading this book and having that message shoved in their face. Like, being skinny and never eating and, you know, being a drug addict and looking like a drug addict but pretty. All of those things are like things to aspire to, and they make you special, and they make boys pay attention to you, as if you starve yourself and you never eat. And I just like the irresponsibility of that is something that I take extremely personally. The next book I'm really not going to talk about very much, because I basically did like a whole spoiler-free review in one of my last wrap-ups. Like, I went super in-depth on this book, kind of without intending to. So I feel like I've already hashed out everything I wanted to say, and that is Snow City by G.A. Kathryns. This is actually a book I received for review, and unfortunately it really did not work for me. But to sum up, really sloppy characterization, again, of our protagonist. She just had no personality whatsoever. Writing that felt incredibly dense for no reason. A plot that started out super boring and then got really chaotic and weird and just like really sloppy and completely different from what the premise of the story was supposed to be about. The fact that the book never actually explored any of the potentially interesting questions it posed about, like, if the main character can just like create an entire world full of people. Apparently nobody was bothered by that, so that was weird. And I also had a really big problem with the way that the black characters were written and described, and specifically the way that the main character knew instantly looking at them that they were in a gang because they were black men. So yeah, there was some racial profiling that was never challenged, so that was a great time. Next is Technically You Started It by Lana Wood Johnson, I think. I actually have a whole review and rant video that I recently posted on this one, so this is another one I'll try not to dwell on too much. I will link that down below. But this is a contemporary novel told entirely in text messages, and I just hated almost everything about this book. I thought the writing was incredibly stilted and also full of like weirdly specific references that I think most readers would not get or find enjoyable. Like, the text messages conversations just felt like nobody would text like this. I mean, like, especially teenagers, but just no human being would type out like verbal pauses the way that these characters did, or like use the words they did. Like, that part of the book, which was the whole thing, just felt very poorly executed. I really didn't like one of the main characters, considering how much better she thought she was than everybody else. She was incredibly judgmental and ignorant and just like really cruel, I think, a lot of times. Like, the relationship between her and the person who you are supposed to want her to end up with just felt very unhealthy and unequal to me. You're probably noticing a theme, because this is another book that had the like not like other girls trope, for just really ridiculous reasons too, especially for a book that was published this year. Like, not that I think there was ever an excuse for it, but I think especially now in 2019, now that we've been talking about these things for several years, it just really bothers me that that is still a thing we have to see in books sometimes. Next is Nights at the Circus by Angela Carter, I think. This was a buddy read with my friend Cousin at Always Doing, and neither of us cared for this book very much. This book is just incredibly pretentious without saying anything. Like, Angela Carter has some good sentences and phrases, like, she can write, but I think that's used to obscure the fact that she had no idea where she wanted to go with this story. I especially had a huge problem with the way that the female characters were handled, because all of them, except for the main character, although arguably that's not even true of her, had serious traumatic experiences related to sexual assault or sexual violence, or like human trafficking or abuse, like domestic violence. Like, all of the trauma and suffering, and specifically gendered violence that these women had to suffer. Even like side characters, where it's like you really didn't need that to create this side character. It got to a point where it was just overwhelming and too much, and I just really hated it. I also didn't like the direction that the plot went. Like, we spent so much more time at the circus than I thought we were going to, because I know the book is called Nights at the Circus, but the premise is not actually about the circus, so I thought we weren't going to be spending too much time there, which is a setting I really don't like. We were also had this like random trek across the tundra. Like, the last quarter of this book was just like in a frozen wasteland where nothing happened. And finally, I'm going to give just a quick honorable mention to one book, and that is The Secret Life of Violet Grant by, again, I forgot, I think it's Beatriz Williams. This is not one of the worst books I read this year. But the reason I'm putting it on this list is because I think it deserves a special mention, because I read this book in January. I think it was even like the first book I finished maybe in the year, and I'm still mad about it because this book had one of the worst endings I have ever read, or at least one of my least favorite. And I talk about it in the wrap-up where I discuss that book, but I just feel like it gets extra points because I have been mad about this book for literally a year at this point. Okay everybody, so those are some of my least favorite books of 2019. Unfortunately, I had quite a lot of them this year, but I think that was balanced out by reading a lot of favorite books, a lot of books I really loved too. Let me know if you also didn't like any of these books or hated any of these books. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye! You know what? I think I'm gonna have to end this video with a cute video shot of my kitty Nala, because she is currently in here while I'm filming and she is adorable, and I want to end this video on a somewhat positive note.
Hi, beautiful. Hi. Good girl. You're so well behaved. Good girl. I love you. I love you.